So, do you want to be the sad writer crying into his whiskey? Or do you want to be the man who walks into the fire with me?
The cursor blinked at me like a rhythmic, accusatory heartbeat. It was 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I was sitting in my home office in Silver Lake, trying to fix a dialogue exchange that sounded like it had been written by an alien who had only learned English by watching soap opera commercials. This was my life. I was Silas Grey, a script doctor. That was the polite term. In reality, I was a janitor for the imagination of Hollywood's elite. I cleaned up the messes left by nepotism hires and burned-out showrunners. I took their broken, incoherent drafts, injected them with soul and structure, and then faded into the background while they collected the Oscars. "Silas, are you still working?" The voice drifted in from the hallway, accompanied by the scent of Santal 33, expensive, woody, and far too strong for a casual night out. I spun my chair around. Jessica stood in the doorway. My wife. She looked breathtaking, I had to admit. She was wearing the black slip dress I had bought her for our 5th anniversary, the one that hugged her curves in a way that made my chest ache. Her blonde hair was pinned up loosely, strands falling perfectly to frame a face that was designed for close-ups. "Just finishing up the Act 2 break for the Paramount project," I said, rubbing my eyes. "You look amazing. Late audition?" She hesitated. Just a fraction of a second. A micro-expression of guilt that a lesser observer might have missed. But I watched people for a living. I wrote subtext for a living. "Not an audition, exactly," she said, smoothing the silk over her hip. "It's a chemistry read, with Adrian Vance, for his new indie project. He likes to work late when the studio is quiet. You know how intense he is." Adrian Vance, the enfant terrible of modern cinema. A director who was as famous for his brooding, artistic vision as he was for his ego. Jessica had been orbiting his production company for months, desperate for a breakout role that would take her from that girl in the yogurt commercial to a serious contender. "Right," I said, forcing a smile. "Chemistry read at midnight?" "Don't start, Cy," she sighed, the softness vanishing from her eyes. "This is how the industry works. You know that. If I get this lead, everything changes for us. We can move out of this rental. We can finally breathe." "I can breathe just fine," I wanted to say. "It's you who's hyperventilating." Instead, I stood up and kissed her cheek. The perfume was suffocating. Underneath it, I smelled mint mouthwash. "Knock 'em dead, Jess. Break a leg." "Don't wait up," she said, already turning away, her phone lighting up in her hand. I listened to the front door click shut, then the sound of her Prius starting up and fading down the hill toward Sunset Boulevard. I stood there in the silence of the empty house. It was a charming 1920s bungalow that we paid too much for, filled with mid-century furniture that looked good but wasn't comfortable. It felt like a set, a stage where we played the role of a happy, artistic couple. I walked back to my computer, but the words on the screen blurred. Chemistry read. The term gnawed at me. I knew Adrian Vance's reputation. He didn't do chemistry reads at midnight. He did them over breakfast or during grueling 12-hour workshop sessions. Midnight was for something else entirely. I needed air. 20 minutes later, I was at the Black Cat, a bar on Sunset that hadn't yet been completely overrun by tourists. It was dark, loud enough to drown out thoughts, and they poured a decent whiskey. I sat at a small table in the corner, nursing a bourbon, watching the eclectic mix of hipsters, writers, and drag queens. I was checking my emails on my phone, another habit of the invisible man, when the atmosphere in the room shifted. It wasn't a noise, it was a gravity change. The chatter at the nearby tables died down. Heads turned. I looked up. Standing at the entrance was a woman who looked like she had just stepped out of a Vanity Fair cover shoot, except she was real, and she was terrifying. She wore a white power suit that glowed in the dim bar light, sharp and immaculate. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, revealing a face of striking, severe beauty. High cheekbones, dark eyes that missed nothing, and lips painted a shade of red that looked like a warning sign. It was Camille De La Cruz. Everyone knew who she was. If Adrian Vance was the artistic genius, Camille was the iron bank that funded him. She was a producer with a reputation for ruthlessness that made Harvey Weinstein look like a choir boy. She controlled the budgets, the casting, and the narrative. What was she doing in a dive bar in Silver Lake at 12:30 a.m.? She didn't scan the room. She knew exactly where she was going. She walked straight toward my corner. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. My heart hammered against my ribs. I instinctively straightened up, feeling underdressed in my flannel shirt and jeans. She stopped at my table. Up close, she was older than Jessica, probably mid-40s, but she possessed a magnetism that youth couldn't buy. There were fine lines around her eyes, but they only added to her intensity. Silas Grey. Her voice was low, smoky, and absolutely devoid of hesitation. "Yes?" I managed to say. "Ms. De La Cruz, I'm a fan of your work." "Cut the shit, Silas," she said. She didn't sit down. She simply reached into her designer bag and pulled out a manila envelope. She dropped it onto the sticky table between my bourbon and a half-eaten bowl of nuts. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the envelope. "Proof," she said. I looked at her, then at the envelope. My stomach dropped. I knew. Before I even opened it, I knew. The chemistry read. The late nights. The mint mouthwash. With trembling fingers, I slid the photos out. They were grainy, taken with a long lens, but the subjects were unmistakable. Jessica and Adrian, on a balcony in the Hollywood Hills, in a car, entering a hotel in Santa Monica, kissing, touching, looking at each other with a hunger that Jessica hadn't looked at me with in 3 years. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. The noise of the bar faded into a high-pitched ringing. "How long?" I whispered, not looking up. "6 months," Camille said. Her voice wasn't pitying. It was factual, clinical. Since pre-production started, I shoved the photos back into the envelope. I felt sick, humiliated. I wanted to crawl into a hole. I wanted to scream. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, finally meeting her gaze. "Why not just divorce him? Why bring this to me?" Camille looked at me for a long moment. Her expression softened, just a fraction. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She saw the pain, and she recognized it because she was carrying it too. "Because they are currently at Musso and Frank," she said, checking her diamond-encrusted watch, "celebrating the green light of their new project. And frankly, Silas, I am tired of eating alone." She extended a hand toward me. Her nails were manicured to perfection. I have a table reserved there in 20 minutes, she said. "I'm asking you out, Silas. Not to cause a scene, not to scream, but to walk in there, sit down, and drink a very expensive bottle of wine while we watch the blood drain from their faces." She tilted her head, a challenge in her eyes. "So," she asked, "do you want to be the sad writer crying into his whiskey? Or do you want to be the man who walks into the fire with me?" I looked at her hand. Then I looked at the envelope. I thought about Jessica's lie. Chemistry read. I stood up. I downed the rest of my bourbon, the burn grounding me. "I'll drive," I said. Camille smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing I had ever seen. "No, darling," she said. We'll take my car. It makes a better entrance." The car was a Bentley Continental GT, black on black, parked illegally in a loading zone outside the Black Cat. It looked like a shark resting in shallow water. I slid into the passenger seat, the heavy door sealing shut with a reassuring thud that cut off the noise of Sunset Boulevard. The interior smelled of new leather and something metallic, cold and sterile. It was the scent of money, not the kind you earn paycheck to paycheck, but the kind that accumulates while you sleep. Camille slid in beside me. She didn't look at me. She pushed the ignition button, and the engine purred to life, a low, menacing rumble that vibrated through the soles of my sneakers. My Converse sneakers. I suddenly felt acutely aware of my scuffed shoes, my flannel shirt that had a small ink stain on the cuff, and the general disarray of my existence. "Seatbelt," she commanded, shifting the car into gear. I clicked the belt into place just as she pulled out into traffic, cutting off a Tesla without blinking. The driver honked. Camille didn't even check the rearview mirror. "So," I said, my voice sounding thin in the acoustic perfection of the cabin. "Musso and Frank. That's cliché, isn't it? For an affair." "It's not cliché, Silas. It's a statement," Camille said, her eyes fixed on the neon blur of the strip. "Adrian loves the history. He thinks eating a steak where Faulkner used to drink makes him an auteur. It's pathetic, really. But he feels safe there. He thinks the red leather booths protect him from the real world." She gripped the steering wheel tight. I noticed her knuckles were white. It was the first sign that the Ice Queen was melting, if only internally. "How are you so calm?" I asked. The shock was starting to wear off, replaced by a nausea that roiled in my gut. I kept picturing Jessica's face, the way she had lied to me an hour ago. Chemistry red. The lie felt worse than the sex. The sex was biological. The lie was architectural. She had constructed a reality for me to live in while she lived in another. "I am not calm," Camille said, her voice dropping an octave. "I am efficient. There is a difference." She took a sharp right onto Highland, the tires screeching slightly. "If I scream, I look like a crazy ex-wife. If I cry, I look weak. In this town, weakness is blood in the water. The moment they see you bleed, your calls stop getting returned. Your funding dries up." She glanced at me for a second, her dark eyes piercing. "You're a writer, Silas. You know how this works. Narrative control. If we let them define this moment, we are the victims, the poor, clueless spouses left behind. But if we define it, we become what? We become the plot twist," she said. We drove in silence for a few minutes. I watched the city roll by. Los Angeles at night is a deceptive beauty. From the hills, it's a grid of diamonds. From the street, it's cracked pavement, homeless encampments, and billboards promising fame to people who will inevitably end up waiting tables. "I love her," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It felt necessary to say it, to acknowledge the corpse of my marriage before we buried it. I've been rewriting her life for 5 years, paying the bills so she could take classes, editing her reels. I made myself invisible so she could shine. Camille didn't mock me. She nodded, a slow, deliberate movement. "And that is why she left you," she said brutally. "Adrian doesn't make anyone shine but himself. She's drawn to his selfishness because she thinks it's genius. You gave her too much cushion, Silas. People don't respect what comes easily." Her words stung, but they had the ring of truth. I had been the safety net. Adrian was the high wire. We turned onto Hollywood Boulevard, the tourist trap. The Walk of Fame was empty, save for a few stragglers taking photos of stars they didn't recognize. Camille pulled up to the valet stand at Musso and Frank Grill, the oldest restaurant in Hollywood, the place where deals were made over martinis and sand dabs. The valet, a young kid in a red vest, stiffened when he saw the car. He scrambled to open Camille's door. "Ms. De La Cruz, good to see you." "Keep it close, Danny," she said, handing him a folded $100 bill. "We won't be long." I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The air here smelled of exhaust and steak fat. My legs felt unsteady. "Wait," Camille said. She walked around the car and stood in front of me. We were roughly the same height, but in her heels, she loomed over me. She reached out and grabbed the collar of my flannel shirt. Her fingers were cool. "You look like a ghostwriter," she murmured, adjusting the fabric, smoothing it down. Slumped shoulders, apologetic eyes. "Stop it." She brushed a piece of lint off my shoulder. The intimacy of the gesture was startling. It wasn't romantic. It was the way a director handles an actor before a crucial take. "Straighten your back," she ordered. I did. "Adrian is charming," she said, looking into my eyes, searching for something. "He sucks the air out of the room. He will try to make you feel small. He will try to make a joke of it. Do not let him. You are the man who is with Camille De La Cruz. Tonight, you are not the husband who was cheated on. You are the upgrade." "I'm wearing flannel, Camille. It's Silver Lake chic," she dismissed. "It says you don't care. That's power. Now take my arm." I hesitated, then looped my arm through hers. Her grip was firm. She smelled like expensive danger. "What's the plan?" I whispered as we approached the heavy wooden doors. "We walk in. The maitre d' knows to take us to their booth." I called ahead. "We sit down. We order drinks. We are pleasant." "Pleasant? Deadly pleasant," she corrected. "We don't talk about the affair. We talk about us. We let them wonder. We let them sweat. Silence is the loudest sound in the world, Silas. Use it." The doorman pulled the door open. The blast of air conditioning hit me, carrying the murmur of conversation and the clinking of silverware. The restaurant was dimly lit, amber and warm, filled with red leather booths and wood paneling. It felt like stepping back into 1950. I felt a surge of adrenaline. This was crazy. This was a scene from one of the melodramas I was hired to fix. But for the first time in years, I wasn't just fixing the script. I was in it. Camille squeezed my arm. "Showtime," she whispered. We walked into the lion's den. The maitre d' was a man named Arthur, who had the posture of a royal guard and a face that had seen every scandal in Hollywood since the Reagan administration. He saw Camille, and his eyes flickered almost imperceptibly toward the back corner of the room. Booth number 1. The Charlie Chaplin booth. Of course. Adrian wouldn't settle for anything less. "Ms. De La Cruz," Arthur murmured, blocking our path slightly. "I believe there might be a conflict of—" "Oh, no conflict, Arthur," Camille interrupted, her voice smooth as silk, but heavy as lead. She didn't stop walking. She simply flowed around him, dragging me in her wake. "We're just joining friends for a drink." We moved through the dining room. Musso and Frank was a cacophony of clinking silverware and low, ambitious chatter. The lighting was amber and forgiving, designed to make aging stars look youthful and illicit affairs look romantic. My heart was beating in my throat, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I scanned the booths, and then I saw them. They looked like a cinematic still frame. Adrian Vance was wearing a black turtleneck that cost more than my car, leaning forward, his hands animatedly sculpting the air as he spoke. Jessica sat opposite him, her chin resting on her hand, her eyes locked on his face with an adoration that gutted me. She was laughing, a genuine head-thrown-back laugh that I hadn't heard in years. There was a bottle of expensive Cabernet between them, already half empty. They looked perfect. They looked happy. Camille's grip on my arm tightened. "Smile, Silas," she whispered through her teeth. "Look like you just won the lottery." We arrived at the booth before they saw us. "Adrian," Camille said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the ambient noise like a scalpel. "Jessica, what a lovely surprise." The effect was instantaneous. Adrian froze, his hand suspended in mid-gesture. The color drained from his face so fast he looked waxen. Jessica's laugh died in her throat, turning into a strangled gasp as she looked up and saw me standing there, arm in arm with the most powerful woman in her husband's world. "Silas?" Jessica squeaked. Her eyes darted from me to Camille, then to our linked arms. What are you doing here?" "We were just in the neighborhood," Camille lied effortlessly. She didn't wait for an invitation. She simply slid into the red leather booth next to Adrian, forcing him to scoot over until he was pressed against the wall. "Scoot over, darling. Make room for Silas." I had no choice. I slid in next to Jessica. The physical proximity was nauseating. I could smell her perfume, the Santal 33, mixed with the wine on her breath. She recoiled slightly, shrinking away from me as if I were the one who had done something wrong. The silence at the table was thick, heavy, and suffocating. "I didn't know you two knew each other," Adrian stammered, trying to recover his composure. He smoothed his hair, a nervous tick. "Camille, I thought you were in New York." "Plans change," Camille said, signaling a waiter with a flick of her wrist. "Just like casting decisions. Right, Adrian?" The waiter appeared instantly. "2 martinis," Camille ordered. "Grey Goose, dirty, 3 olives, and bring another menu." She turned her gaze to Jessica. It was a predator looking at prey, but with a veneer of polite disinterest. "Jessica, isn't it? Silas has told me so much about you. He says you're an actress." The way she said actress made it sound like a hobby, like knitting or stamp collecting. Jessica looked at me, her eyes pleading, terrified. "Silas, I told you I was at a chemistry read." "I know," I said. My voice was surprisingly steady. I looked at the half-eaten steak on Adrian's plate. "I guess the chemistry is undeniable." Jessica flinched. "Yeah, Silas and I are celebrating," Camille announced, placing her hand over mine on the white tablecloth. Her hand was warm now, grounding me. "I've decided to option his new script. It's a brilliant piece. A tragedy about a man who trusts the wrong people." Adrian's eyes narrowed. He was smart. He knew exactly what was happening, but he was trapped by social convention and his own financial dependence on Camille. He couldn't cause a scene with his producer. "That's great," Adrian managed. "I didn't know you were writing a spec, Silas." "There's a lot you don't know about me, Adrian," I replied. I picked up the glass of water in front of me and took a sip, mostly to hide the trembling of my lip. "I've been doing a lot of rewrites lately, fixing other people's broken narratives. Figured it was time to write my own." The waiter returned with the martinis. Camille raised hers. "A toast," she said, her dark eyes locking onto Adrian's. "To transparency, and to the things we do in the dark." We clinked glasses. The sound was sharp, like a cracking bone. Jessica looked like she was going to vomit. She put her napkin on the table. I think I need to use the ladies' room." "Sit down, Jessica," Camille said. It wasn't a request. Jessica sat, We aren't staying long, Camille continued, taking a slow sip of her drink. I just wanted to make sure you two were comfortable. The studio is very invested in your happiness, Adrian. We wouldn't want any personal distractions to derail the production schedule, would we? She was threatening to pull the plug. She was holding his career hostage at the dinner table, and he knew it. Camille, look, Adrian started, his voice lowering to a whisper. This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you're eating a ribeye with my husband's wife, Camille said flatly. But I'm sure there's a perfectly reasonable artistic explanation. Maybe method acting? She turned to me, her expression softening into a dazzling, fabricated smile. Ready to go, darling? We have that reservation at Chateau Marmont. She finished her martini in one long swallow, stood up, and pulled me up with her. I looked down at Jessica one last time. She was small, huddled in the corner of the booth, stripped of her glamour. She looked at me, waiting for me to yell, to cry, to save her. Enjoy the chemistry, I said. I turned my back on her. Walking out of the restaurant was the hardest acting I had ever done. My legs felt like jelly. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run back, to flip the table, to demand answers. But Camille's hand was on the small of my back, guiding me, pushing me forward. We burst out into the cool night air of Hollywood Boulevard. The valet saw us coming and sprinted for the Bentley. As soon as the car doors closed, enclosing us in the silence of the cabin, I collapsed back against the seat. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 20 minutes. Jesus Christ, I whispered. My hands were shaking uncontrollably now. Camille didn't start the car immediately. She sat there, staring straight ahead through the windshield at the neon lights reflecting on the hood. Then, I saw it. A single tear tracked down her perfect powdered cheek. She wiped it away furiously, as if it were an insult. You did good, Silas, she said, her voice tight. You held the frame. I feel like I'm going to throw up, I admitted. Good, she said, starting the engine. The roar of the W12 engine filled the space. That means it's real. Now buckle up. The night isn't over. Where are we going? You said Chateau Marmont was a lie. She glanced at me, her eyes dry and dangerous again. It was, she said. We're going to my house in Malibu. We need to strategize. Because tomorrow morning, Adrian is going to call my office and beg, and Jessica is going to come home and cry. And we need to know exactly what the next page of the script says. She peeled away from the curb, leaving the restaurant and our old lives in the rearview mirror. The Pacific Coast Highway at 2 a.m. is a ribbon of darkness bordered by the indifferent violence of the ocean. Camille drove in silence, the Bentley cutting through the fog rolling in off the water. We arrived at her home in Malibu, an architectural fortress of concrete and glass perched precariously on a cliff edge. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a museum where happiness was the only exhibit missing. Inside, the house was cold. Not temperature-wise. The climate control was set to a perfect 68 degrees, but emotionally. It was a vast expanse of white marble, minimalist Italian furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows that turned the black ocean into a living wallpaper. Guest room is down the hall, second door on the left, Camille said, kicking off her heels near the foyer. She looked smaller without them. There are clothes in the closet, Adrian's size. They should fit. The mention of his name was a tactical strike. She was reminding me that we were standing in the wreckage of his betrayal. What is this, Camille? I asked, standing in the center of her cavernous living room. Revenge? Therapy? She walked to the wet bar and poured 2 glasses of sparkling water. She handed one to me. It's a production, Silas, she said, her eyes dark and unreadable. Right now, The narrative is that Adrian and Jessica are the star-crossed lovers, and we are the collateral damage, unsexy, pitiful. I refuse to play that role. We are going to rewrite the script. How? By becoming the couple they wish they were, she said. We go out. We are seen. We look incredible. We look unbothered. We make them wonder if they were the ones holding us back. And so, the performance began. Over the next 2 weeks, I lived 2 lives. By day, I was still Silas the ghostwriter, sitting in coffee shops, ignoring the barrage of texts from Jessica. She had come home that first night at 3 a.m., sobbing, spinning a web of lies about the dinner, claiming she was just networking and that I had embarrassed her. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just moved into the guest room of our bungalow and told her I needed space to write. My silence terrified her more than my anger ever could. By night, however, I was Camille De La Cruz's companion. She curated me. That's the only word for it. She sent a tailor to my house while Jessica was at an audition. He fitted me for 3 suits, navy, charcoal, and midnight blue. She sent a barber who trimmed my unruly writer's hair into something sharper, more severe. You have a good face, Silas, Camille told me one evening as she adjusted my tie in the mirror of her foyer. You've just been hiding it behind apology. Our debut was the LACMA Art Plus Film Gala. It was the kind of event where the air smelled of ozone and desperation, and the flashbulbs were bright enough to trigger a seizure. When we stepped onto the red carpet, I felt a wave of panic. I was a man who wrote in the shadows. I didn't belong in the light. But Camille slipped her hand into mine. Her grip was firm, anchoring me. Shh, chin up, she whispered, smiling for the cameras without moving her lips. Look at me like I'm the only person here. Ignore them. I turned to her. In her emerald gown, she was devastating. I didn't have to act. I looked at her with genuine awe, partially because of her beauty, but mostly because of her sheer will. She was walking through fire and refusing to burn. The photos went viral by morning. Producer Camille De La Cruz steps out with Mystery Man. Who is the new guy on the arm of Hollywood's Iron Lady? We didn't answer the questions. We let the silence build the myth, but the real acting happened in the quiet moments. One Tuesday, after a screening at the Directors Guild, where we had successfully ignored Adrian, who was sitting 3 rows back, practically vibrating with anxiety, we retreated to her Malibu house. The adrenaline of the performance had worn off. Camille slumped onto her white sofa, looking exhausted. The armor was cracking. "Do you want a drink?" I asked, loosening my tie. I felt comfortable in the house now, which was dangerous. "Tea," she murmured. "Please." I made tea in her kitchen that cost more than my parents' entire house. When I brought it to her, she was staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was the only personal item in the room. A picture of a younger Camille, smiling, holding a puppy. "I wanted kids, you know," she said suddenly. She didn't look at me. She addressed the ocean. I sat down on the ottoman opposite her. "What happened?" "Time," she said. "And ambition. And Adrian. He always said, 'Next year, Cam. Next year after this movie wrapped. After the award season.' He kept moving the goalpost." She took a sip of tea, her hand trembling slightly. "I woke up one day and realized I was 44, and the only thing I had given birth to were box office receipts." "You built an empire, Camille." "I built a bank account," she corrected. "And now the man I built it for is sleeping with a 26-year-old actress who thinks Casablanca is a brand of beer." She looked at me then, her eyes wet. It was the first time I saw the woman beneath the producer. She wasn't cold. She was frozen for preservation. "I'm sorry," I said softly. Don't be!" she snapped, her walls going back up instantly. "I don't want pity, Silas. I want to win." "This isn't winning," I said, taking a risk. "Parading me around like a trophy. It's effective, sure, but it's exhausting. You're tired, Camille." She stared at me, stunned that I had challenged her. In her world, people didn't challenge Camille De La Cruz. They nodded and asked how high to jump. "And what do you suggest, Mr. Grey?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Should I knit?" "I suggest you take off the shoes," I said, "and stop producing this moment." I reached out and very slowly unbuckled the strap of her high heel. She flinched, but she didn't pull away. I slid the shoe off, then the other. I placed them on the rug. "Better?" I asked. She looked at her bare feet, then at me. The silence in the room changed frequency. It wasn't the strategic silence of the restaurant. It was heavy, charged, and confusing. "You're a dangerous man, Silas," she whispered. "I'm just a ghostwriter," I replied. "I notice things people overlook." "What do you see when you look at me?" "I see someone who is tired of being the strong one," I said. Camille leaned forward. The distance between us closed to inches. I could smell the expensive jasmine of her perfume, but underneath it, the scent of warm skin and fatigue. For a moment, I thought she was going to kiss me. I wanted her to. Not for the cameras, not for Adrian, but because in this sterile glass box, she was the most real thing I had ever encountered. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She pulled back as if she'd been burned. She glanced at the screen. "It's Adrian," she said, her voice turning hard again. "He says he needs to talk about the budget for the third act. He's panicking." She picked up the phone, her face rearranging itself into the mask of the Iron Lady. "I have to take this," she said, dismissing me. "Good night, Silas." I stood up and walked to the guest room. I closed the door and leaned against it, listening to her voice in the other room, sharp, commanding, in control. I checked my own phone. 3 missed calls from Jessica. 1 text. "I miss you. Please come back to bed." I looked at the text, then at the closed door of the guest room. I realized with a jolt of terror that I didn't want to go back to my bed. I didn't want the bungalow. I didn't want the lie I had been living for 5 years. I wanted the woman in the other room who was currently destroying her husband over the phone while barefoot. I was supposed to be acting, but somewhere between the red carpet and the chamomile tea, I had forgotten my lines. The Santa Ana winds had started blowing, hot and dry, turning the Los Angeles sky into a hazy, electrified dome. It was the kind of weather that made people edgy, the kind that sparked wildfires in the hills and madness in the streets. It had been 3 weeks since the dinner at Musso and Frank. In that time, Camille and I had become the favorite subplot of the industry trade papers. Deadline ran a piece on Camille's bold new aesthetic phase, citing her relationship with a mysterious intellectual as the catalyst for her recent fearless business decisions. TMZ just posted photos of us holding hands at the Malibu Farmers Market. We were winning. The narrative had shifted. Adrian Vance wasn't the tortured genius finding his muse in a young actress. He was the erratic director whose production was plagued by delays, while his estranged wife looked better than she had in a decade. But inside the glass fortress in Malibu, the script was getting messy. I was in the kitchen, chopping garlic. I had taken to cooking for Camille. It started as a practical necessity. She survived on espresso and air, but it had become a ritual, a domestic anchor in the storm we had created. The front door slammed. Camille stormed in, tossing her Birkin bag onto the sofa with uncharacteristic violence. She looked wrecked. Her hair was windblown, and the sharp tailoring of her suit seemed to hang heavy on her frame. "Don't ask," she warned, walking straight to the wine fridge. "Rough day on set?" I asked anyway, sliding the garlic into the sizzling olive oil. The smell filled the sterile kitchen, making it feel almost like a home. "Adrian is a child," she seethed, pouring a glass of Sauvignon Blanc. "He fired the cinematographer today because the lighting didn't understand his pain. The studio is threatening to pull the bond. If this movie collapses, Silas, it's not just him who goes down. It's my company's reputation, too." She leaned against the marble island, watching me cook. She looked defeated. The thrill of revenge was fading, replaced by the grim reality of business. "Let it burn," I said quietly. "I can't," she snapped. "That's $40 million of my leverage he's playing with. I hate him, yes, but I love my work. I won't let his midlife crisis destroy what I built." I stopped stirring the pasta sauce and looked at her. "Is that what this is about? The money? It's always about the money, Silas. Don't be naive." "I don't think it is," I said. "I think you're still protecting him. You're still producing his life, making sure he doesn't fall too hard." Camille's eyes flashed. "You're the ghostwriter, remember? You fix scripts. You don't analyze the producer." "I'm not acting right now, Camille." I walked around the island. She didn't retreat. She stood her ground, gripping the wine glass like a weapon. We were inches apart. The air between us was charged, thick with the heat of the Santa Anas and 3 weeks of unsaid things. "We made a deal," she whispered, her voice wavering. "We pretend. We win. We go back to our lives." "My life is gone, Camille," I said. "Jessica calls me 10 times a day. She leaves voicemails crying, saying Adrian is distant, that he's paranoid about us. The affair is crumbling because they can't handle the guilt. We won. The play is over." "Then why are you still here?" she asked. It wasn't a challenge. It was a genuine question. She looked terrified of the answer. "Because I don't want to go back to Silver Lake," I said. "And I don't think you want to eat dinner alone." I reached out and took the wine glass from her hand, setting it on the counter. Then I took her hand. It was cold, despite the heat of the night. "The scene is over, Camille," I murmured. "No cameras, no Adrian, just us." She looked at me, searching my face for any sign of deception. She was so used to transactional relationships, to people wanting something from her. Money, access, fame. She couldn't compute that I just wanted her. "I don't know how to do this without a script," she admitted, her voice breaking. "I don't know who I am when I'm not controlling everything." "Then let me write this part," I said. I kissed her. It wasn't like the staged peck on the cheek we had done for the paparazzi outside Nobu. It was slow, tentative, and terrifyingly real. It tasted of wine and hesitation. She stiffened for a second, a reflex of control, and then she melted. She made a sound in her throat, a soft whimper that shattered the last of the Iron Lady facade. Her arms went around my neck, pulling me down, her fingers tangling in my hair. The kiss deepened, becoming urgent. It wasn't fueled by revenge or anger. It was fueled by a profound, aching loneliness that we had both been carrying for years. It was the collision of 2 people who had been invisible in their own marriages. Me, the ghost, her, the bankroll, finally seeing each other. We didn't make it to the bedroom. We stumbled onto the oversized white sofa in the living room, the one that looked like it had never been sat on. Clothes were discarded in a pile of Armani and flannel. The floor-to-ceiling windows exposed us to the dark ocean. But for the first time, Camille didn't care who was watching. The sex was slow, intense, and incredibly intimate. There was no performance. There were no camera angles. There was just the friction of skin, the sound of breath, and the feeling of being completely known. When I touched her, she didn't direct me. She simply felt. Afterward, we lay tangled together on the sofa, covered by a cashmere throw. The house was silent except for the wind howling outside. Camille rested her head on my chest, tracing the line of my collarbone with her finger. "This wasn't in the outline," she whispered. "Best rewrites never are," I said, kissing the top of her head. "Silas," she said, her tone serious now. "You know this complicates everything. If this is real, then we aren't just teaching them a lesson anymore. We're blowing up the bridge." "Good," I said. "I never liked that bridge anyway." She laughed, a soft, genuine sound that vibrated against my ribs. "Adrian called me today," she said quietly. "Not about the movie. He asked if I was in love with you." "What did you say?" I told him to focus on his blocking," she said. "But I think I lied." My heart skipped a beat. "About the blocking? About the love," she said, looking up at me. Her eyes were unguarded, wide and dark. "I think I might be in trouble, Silas Grey." I looked at this woman, this titan of industry who terrified half of Hollywood, curled up in my arms, vulnerable and real. "We're both in trouble," I said. But the trouble was just beginning. As if on cue, my phone, which I had left on the kitchen island, lit up. Then it buzzed. Then it buzzed again and again. A relentless stream of notifications. Camille sat up, pulling the throw blanket around her. "What is that?" I got up and walked to the island. I picked up the phone. It wasn't Jessica. It was a Google alert I had set up years ago for my own name, back when I still hoped to publish a novel. Variety breaking news. Production halted on Adrian Vance's The Glass City after lead actress Jessica Thorne hospitalized following on-set breakdown. Sources cite emotional exhaustion and rumors of on-set volatility. I stared at the screen. The blood drained from my face. "What is it?" Camille asked, sensing the shift in the room. I turned the phone to face her. "Jessica is in the hospital," I said. "She had a breakdown on set." Camille stared at the headline. The softness vanished from her face, replaced by a look of horror. "We pushed too hard," she whispered. The reality of what we had done crashed into the room. We weren't just rewriting a script anymore. We were messing with human lives, and the genre had just shifted from romantic comedy to tragedy. "I have to go," I said, reaching for my shirt. "It's Silas, wait." Camille stood up, the blanket falling away. "If you go to her now, you validate the old narrative. You become the husband again. She's in the hospital, Camille. I can't just leave her there." "Tuki, if you walk out that door," Camille said, her voice trembling but firm, "you are walking back into the past. And I won't be here when you decide to return." I paused, one arm in my shirt sleeve. I looked at the woman I was falling for, and then at the phone that connected me to the woman I had promised to protect. The rewrite was over. This was the twist I hadn't seen coming. I buttoned my shirt. It felt like I was putting on a costume I had outgrown. "I have to go, Camille," I said. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I looked at her, standing there wrapped in a cashmere blanket, looking like a queen whose kingdom had just been invaded, I wouldn't leave. And I needed to leave. Not to save Jessica, but to make sure I wasn't the monster in this story. "If you go," Camille said, her voice devoid of the warmth that had been there 10 minutes ago, "you are proving that you are still her husband first, and your own man second. I'm going because she's a human being who is alone in a hospital, I said, grabbing my keys. And because if I don't, Adrian will spin this so that we're the villains who drove her crazy. You want to control the narrative? This is how I do it. I walked out. The heavy front door clicked shut, a sound that felt final. The drive to Cedars-Sinai was a blur of red taillights and adrenaline. My phone kept buzzing. TMZ had updated. Jessica Thorne on 5150 hold. Director Adrian Vance spotted arguing with paramedics. When I arrived at the hospital, the circus was already in town. A cluster of photographers camped near the emergency entrance, their lenses like long snouts sniffing for tragedy. I parked in the structure and took the back way in, slipping through the corridors like the ghost I was used to being. I found them in a private waiting room on the 4th floor. Adrian Vance was pacing the small room, looking less like a visionary director and more like a cornered rat. His trademark messy hair was actually messy now, not styled. He was yelling into his phone. "Oh no, you can't pull the bond. It's a minor setback. She's just dehydrated. We can shoot around her scenes." He saw me and froze. He lowered the phone. "Silas," he breathed, a look of immense relief washing over him. He actually took a step toward me, as if we were allies. "Thank God. You can talk to her. She's being unreasonable. She won't sign the release forms. She's talking about quitting the production." I looked at him. Really looked at him. For months I had been jealous of this man. I had imagined him as a titan, a lover who could give Jessica the passion I couldn't. Now, under the fluorescent lights of a hospital waiting room, he looked small. He was a vampire who had run out of blood. "Where is she?" I asked. "Room 412. "But Silas, listen." He grabbed my arm. His grip was sweaty. "You have to calm her down. If she quits, the movie dies. If the movie dies, I'm ruined. We are ruined. Camille will kill me." I looked at his hand on my arm, then up at his eyes. "You're not worried about her," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "You're worried about the money. It's not just money, it's art, it's—" I shoved him. It wasn't a cinematic punch. It was a shove, hard and dismissive, sending him stumbling back into a plastic fern. "Stay here," I commanded. I walked into room 412. Jessica was lying in the bed, hooked up to a saline drip. She looked tiny. The makeup from the shoot was smeared under her eyes, making her look like a broken doll. She opened her eyes when I entered. When she saw me, her face crumpled. "See," she sobbed. "You came." She reached her hand out. The reflex was to take it, to rush to her side, smooth her hair, tell her I would fix it, that I would rewrite the scene so she came out on top. That's what I had done for 5 years. I stood at the foot of the bed. I didn't take her hand. "Are you okay, Jess?" I asked. "It was awful," she cried, the words tumbling out. "Adrian, he's a monster. He made me do 20 takes of the crying scene. He kept screaming that I was fake, that I didn't have the depth. He said I was boring him." She looked at me, her eyes pleading for validation. "He's not who I thought he was, Si. He's cruel. I miss you. I miss us. I miss home." It was a perfect performance. The prodigal wife returns, shattered by the cruel world, seeking the sanctuary of the faithful husband. But as I watched her, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. Nothing. No anger, no pity, no love. Just a dull, hollow recognition. "You don't miss us, Jess," I said softly. "You miss the safety. You gambled on him, and it didn't pay out. So now you want your chips back." She stopped crying instantly. She stared at me. "How can you say that? I'm your wife. You were his mistress for 6 months, I said. You only remembered you were my wife when the director called cut. I made a mistake, she shrieked, the monitor beeping faster. I was seduced. I was manipulated. Can't you forgive me? I can forgive you, I said, but I can't be your audience anymore. I pulled my phone out. I called your sister in Portland. She's flying down. She'll be here in 3 hours. Until then, the nurses will watch you. You're leaving? She looked terrified. But what about the house? What about me? I don't know, Jess. That's a rewrite you'll have to do yourself. I turned and walked out. Silas, she screamed after me. Silas, don't you dare walk away from me. I kept walking. In the hallway, Adrian was waiting. He looked hopeful. Did you fix it? He asked. She's done, Adrian, I said, walking past him. And so are you. I left the hospital. The air outside was thick with smog, but it tasted sweet. I got into the Bentley, which I had forgotten I was driving, and realized my hands were steady. I drove back to Malibu. I didn't know if the door would be locked. I didn't know if Camille would be there. I didn't know if I had blown the only real thing I had found in years. I pulled into the driveway of the glass fortress. There was another car there, a Porsche 911, Adrian's car. My stomach dropped. He must have left the hospital right after me, driving like a maniac to get here first. I ran to the front door. It was unlocked. I burst into the living room. The scene before me was like a tableau from a Renaissance painting. Camille was sitting on the white sofa, wearing a silk robe, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked regal, untouchable. Adrian was on his knees in front of her, literally on his knees. He was weeping, his hands grasping at the hem of her robe. Camille, please, he was blubbering. You have to release the contingency funds. If we shut down now, the studio will bury me. I can salvage it. I can recast Jessica. I can rewrite the ending. Just give me another chance. I'll come home. I promise. I'll end it with her. I'll do whatever you want. He was offering himself back to her. The wandering dog returning to the master who held the leash. Camille looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. Her expression didn't change. She looked from me, disheveled and smelling of hospital antiseptic, to her husband, groveling on the floor. Well, Camille said, her voice dry as a martini. The cast is all here. Adrian spun around, seeing me. His face went from pathetic to panicked. Silas, Adrian stammered, scrambling to his feet. I was just explaining to Camille. I heard, I said. I walked into the room, stepping into the space between them. I looked at Camille. This was the moment, the twist. The husband was begging to come back. The affair had imploded. She had won. She had broken him, and now she could have him back on her terms, completely submissive. That was the goal, wasn't it? He wants to come home, I said to Camille. Yes, Camille said, swirling her wine. He does. And Jessica wants to come home too, I added. I just left her. She's ready to be the dutiful wife again. Adrian nodded enthusiastically. See, it's over. The madness is over, Cam. We can go back to normal. Camille stood up. She walked over to Adrian. She looked him up and down with an expression of profound boredom. You know, Adrian, she said. For 20 years, I thought normal was what I wanted. I thought if I just produced your life perfectly enough, you would eventually love me as much as you love your reflection. She turned her gaze to me. Her eyes softened. But then, she continued, I went off script. She turned back to Adrian. Get out of my house. Adrian blinked. What? Get out, she said, her voice turning to steel. The production is canceled, Adrian. I'm pulling the plug. The movie is dead, and so is this marriage. You can't, Adrian gasped. You'll lose millions. I'll write it off as a tax loss, she shrugged. Consider it the price of admission for my freedom. But where will I go? Adrian whispered, his world collapsing. I hear the Chateau Marmont has vacancies, she said. Now, get out. Adrian looked at me, hoping for an ally. I just opened the front door for him. He walked out, a broken man, into the dark Malibu night. I closed the door and locked it. We were alone again. The silence was deafening, but it wasn't empty. You came back, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I told you, I said, walking toward her. I'm done with the past. I thought you went to save her. I went to say goodbye, I said. I reached her and took the wine glass from her hand, setting it down. So, I said, the movie is canceled. The marriages are over. What do we do now? Camille smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. Now, she said. Now we start the sequel. The event was the annual Lumina Studio Showcase at the Dolby Theater. In Hollywood, contracts are stronger than marriages, stronger than dignity, and certainly stronger than heartbreak. Despite the cancellation of the Glass City, despite the lawsuits flying like shrapnel between Camille's lawyers and Adrian's agents, everyone was contractually obligated to appear. It was a funeral dressed up as a party. I stood in the wings of the red carpet, adjusting my cufflinks. They were gold, a gift from Camille. Real gold, not plated. A reminder that I wasn't an imitation of anything anymore. Are you ready? Camille asked. She stood beside me, looking like a weapon of mass destruction in a gown of liquid silver. Her back was straight, her chin high, but her hand found mine and squeezed it tight. Her palm was damp.